I still remember the day that envelope showed up in my mailbox. It was cream-colored thick, the kind of stationery you only see when someone wants to impress. For a moment, I thought it might be a wedding invitation from one of the neighbor's kids, or maybe another notice from the homeowners association about my peeling fence. But when I turned it over and read the name printed on the front, my heart skipped. It was Daniel's birthday invitation. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. 30 years old. My boy, the one I once carried on my shoulders through the county fair, now a man building a life of his own. The envelope said the party would be held at a high-end restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd only ever passed by but never walked into. And what struck me wasn't the fancy print or the gold edging. It was the sender. The bottom corner read, "From Melissa Carter, not Daniel." I stood there on the porch, the wood groaning beneath my weight, the winter air sharp against my face, and I let that detail sink in. His girlfriend. No, by now she was more like a partner had sent me the invitation. Daniel hadn't even signed his own name. I told myself it didn't matter. At least I was invited. That was more than I expected, if I'm being honest. My name is Edward Miller. I'm 65 years old. A retired high school history teacher in the state of Ohio. For over 4 decades, I taught in classrooms that smelled of chalk and teenage cologne, telling kids about the American Revolution, the Great Depression, and the lessons we should carry forward. I never became rich doing it, but I believed in the work. I believed in shaping young minds. When I retired, the district gave me a clock and a handshake. These days, my life is simpler. I wake up early without an alarm, pour myself a mug of black coffee, and sit on the creaking front porch with the plain dealer folded under my arm. The house I live in isn't grand, just a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint and a roof that leaks if the rain comes heavy. But it's mine paid off with decades of steady work and sacrifice. Daniel's life, on the other hand, looks nothing like mine. He dove headfirst into real estate, chasing commissions and living in a sleek condo with glass walls and leather couches. His shoes shine brighter than the linoleum in my kitchen, and the suits he wears could pay my utility bills for a whole season. I don't begrudge him that success. God knows I wanted him to have more than I did. But somewhere along the way, the distance between us grew wider than the miles across town. 10 years ago, when Daniel wanted to buy his first property, the bank wouldn't touch him without a cosigner. I remember sitting across from that loan officer, my hand steady as I signed my name. I told myself, this is what fathers do. For a decade, I carried that weight quietly, making sure payments didn't fall behind. I never complained. Daniel called it his big break. I called it my duty. Now, with this invitation in my hand, I felt something stir in my chest. Maybe this party was his way of acknowledging me, of showing me off to his friends and colleagues. Maybe deep down, he still knew who had been standing behind him all these years. I brushed the thought aside as wishful thinking, but a man my age learns to hold on to hope where he can find it. As I sat at my small kitchen table, the linoleum worn thin from years of shuffling feet, I turned the envelope over again and again. I thought of Daniel's smile when he was 10 years old, when I baked him a lopsided chocolate cake and lit 10 candles. He had hugged me, then sticky fingers and all whispering, "You're the best dad." That memory warmed me against the chill creeping through the drafty window. I straightened my back and told myself, yes, I would go. I would show up even if my suit was outdated and my shoes scuffed. I would bring the gift I had been preparing for months, locked in a small wooden box tucked carefully in the top drawer of my dresser. A gift not wrapped in ribbons or glossy paper, but in something much heavier truth. The week leading up to the party, I found myself fussing over things I hadn't thought about in years. I pulled my old navy suit from the back of the closet, brushing off the dust that clung to the shoulders. The fabric had thinned and the elbows shone with wear, but it was the only suit I owned. I tried it on in front of the hallway mirror. The pants sagged a little and the jacket pinched when I lifted my arms. Still, I told myself it would do. A man like me didn't need to look flashy, just respectable. At the diner where I sometimes take breakfast, the waitress, Judy, noticed me reading the invitation again. She's seen me sit at the corner booth countless mornings sipping weak coffee and ordering the cheapest plate on the menu. "Big plans, Ed?" she asked, pouring me a refill. My son's turning 30, I said, folding the card carefully. There's a party. Fancy place downtown. Her eyes lit up. That's wonderful. You must be proud. I nodded, though the lump in my throat made it hard to swallow. Proud, yes. But there was something else there, too, a dull ache that never quite went away. That night I sat on the porch, the air crisp, watching the street lamps flicker on one by one. I thought about the wooden box upstairs in my dresser drawer. Inside it lay more than just papers. It was 10 years of sacrifice of checks, written quietly, of nights spent cutting back on groceries to make sure payments went through. I had imagined the day Daniel might discover the truth. I just never thought it would be on his 30th birthday. Melissa called me once that week. Her voice was polite but sharp, like someone reminding you of rules you didn't write. Mr. Miller? She said the party starts at 7. Just try not to be late, all right? I almost asked if Daniel knew she was calling. Instead, I said I'll be there. After we hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It struck me then that she had never once called me Dad, never even Ed, always Mr. Miller, as though I were a stranger. The closer I drew to the restaurant, the tighter the knot in my chest became. The downtown streets glowed with neon signs and headlights, people rushing about in coats and scarves, laughter drifting from doorways. My sedan looked out of place between the polished cars that lined the curb. I parked at the far end under a flickering street lamp and sat for a moment with the engine idling. The wooden box lay on the passenger seat. I ran my hand across its smooth surface, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. That box carried 10 years of my life, and tonight it would speak louder than I ever could. When I finally stepped out, the night air cut sharp, filled with the scent of exhaust and the faint aroma of garlic and wine from the restaurants nearby. I adjusted my tie, pulled my coat tighter, and walked toward the glowing entrance, where a doorman in a crisp uniform stood greeting guests. The building itself shimmered with glass and polished brass. Through the wide windows, I saw the crowd gathered inside, women in sequined dresses, men in tailored suits, champagne flutes catching the light. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out each time the door opened. For a brief moment, I imagined walking in Daniel, spotting me, his face softening into the smile I remembered from his childhood. Maybe he would clap me on the back, introduce me proudly. This is my father, the man who stood by me. That tiny hope flickered in me, like the weak bulb on my porch back home. I took a step forward, then another. The doorman nodded, reaching for the handle. But before the door could swing wide, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Daniel. He looked sharp in a charcoal suit, hair slicked back, the kind of confident stride that made people part around him. But when his eyes landed on me, the warmth I longed for wasn't there. His expression tightened, jaw clenching, as though my presence were a stain on his perfect night. Dad. He said flatly, stepping outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The music and laughter dimmed with it, leaving only the muffled beat. I opened my mouth, ready to say something simple, maybe happy birthday, son. But the words caught when I saw the hardness in his eyes. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice low but firm. Nobody wants you here. The words landed heavier than any blow. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding in my ears, the rush of blood. My hand tightened on the box at my side. I tried to swallow, but my throat had gone dry. My mind flashed back to a smaller Daniel, no older than 7, running into my classroom after school. He had drawn a stick figure picture me in front of a chalkboard, him holding my hand. At the top in crooked letters he had scrawled, "My hero." And now that same boy stood before me, a man grown, cutting me down with words sharper than knives. I lowered my eyes, blinking against the sting in them. The air around us felt colder, the city noise distant and muffled. I managed a nod, though my chest ached with the weight of it. All right, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I turned away before he could see the tear slip free. The doorman shifted awkwardly, eyes darting between us, but said nothing. My steps felt heavy as I walked back toward the sidewalk, each one echoing with a hollow finality. Behind me, the restaurant door opened again, and a wave of laughter rushed out, swallowing the sound of my retreat. I walked slowly down the block, the soles of my shoes catching on cracks in the pavement. The laughter from inside the restaurant echoed behind me, muffled by the heavy door, but still sharp enough to sting. Each sound felt like a reminder that I had been pushed out of a place where I thought I might still belong. I stopped near the corner where the glow of a neon sign flickered above a small cafe. Through the window, I could see a young couple sharing a slice of pie, leaning close, whispering secrets. For a moment, I saw myself years ago, Margaret sitting across from me in a booth, much like that one, her smile wide, as she teased me for ordering black coffee again. That was a lifetime ago. Now the only thing I carried was a box of papers and the hollow ache of a father turned away. I found a bench nearby and sat down, the cold metal seeping through my coat. I placed the wooden box on my lap and stared at it. The streetlight above buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow across the lid. This wasn't how I imagined the night would go. I had thought maybe, just maybe, Daniel would remember who I was to him. But instead he had shut the door before I could take a single step inside. A group of guests arrived, dressed in sparkling gowns and crisp tuxedos. They passed me without a glance, swept up in their conversations about deals, vacations, and new cars. Their laughter trailed behind them as they entered the restaurant, the door swinging open long enough for me to hear the clink of glasses, the hum of Daniel's name being toasted. I turned my eyes back to the box. Inside were the documents that told the truth: bank statements, payment records, proof that every month for the past 10 years I had been the one keeping Daniel's dream afloat. He had paraded that dream around as if it were built on his own two hands, but tonight I intended to show him what it truly cost. Still sitting on that bench in the cold, I felt the weight of something heavier than the papers. I felt the weight of years spent hoping for gratitude that never came, of waiting for a simple thank you, or a phone call on Father's Day, or a moment when he'd remember that I was more than a shadow in the background. I wiped at my eyes with the back of my hand and took a steadying breath. The night wasn't over. The box was still with me. Daniel might have turned me away from the door, but he hadn't silenced me. I rose from the bench, the box tucked back under my arm. The restaurant loomed ahead, glowing and alive, as if daring me to come closer. I didn't know yet how I would get that box into his hands, but I knew one thing for certain: Daniel wasn't done hearing from me. As I walked back toward my car, the laughter behind me swelled once more, full of pride and pretense. I let it wash over me, not with bitterness this time, but with resolve. He thought shutting that door ended the story. He was wrong. I watched as guests moved inside, laughter rising like a tide, and I couldn't help but imagine what Daniel must be feeling standing at the center of it all. I didn't have to imagine for long. Through the window, clear as day, I saw him raise a glass, his arm sweeping wide, drawing every eye in the room. Daniel's smile was broad, practiced, the kind that told people he belonged there, and in a way he did. He had made sure of that. Melissa stood beside him, her red dress catching the light, a diamond bracelet flashing at her wrist. She leaned in close to him, whispering something in his ear, and he laughed loudly enough that even from across the street I could feel its reach. I shifted on the bench, the wooden box pressing into my side. My hands itched to hold it, to march through those doors and set it right on the table in front of him. But I stayed put, my heart pounding. Inside, Daniel was on a roll. He began pointing to a slideshow that played on a big screen behind him, photos of a condo with glass walls, a shiny black car parked in a driveway, snapshots of him shaking hands at ribbon cuttings. Each picture seemed to say, "Look how far I've come." The crowd responded exactly the way he wanted. Applause rippled like steady waves, heads nodding in admiration. Someone clapped him on the back. Another raised a toast. Melissa's voice carried clearly when she spoke, the microphone catching every syllable. Daniel built everything by himself. No one helped him. Her tone was firm, rehearsed, as though daring anyone to disagree. My stomach twisted. I could almost feel the ink from those monthly checks on my fingertips, the countless nights of balancing my pension against his loans. No one helped him. The words rang bitter. Daniel chuckled, pretending to protest modestly, but I saw the pride in his posture, the way he soaked in their praise. He clinked his glass against Melissa's and said, "Here's to the next 30 years. The crowd erupted again, the sound muffled by the glass, but still powerful enough to sting. Then something else caught my eye. Near the buffet, two men in suits leaned close together, their voices low. I couldn't hear them, but I watched their expressions. One arched a brow, lips curling in a skeptical half-smile. The other shrugged, glancing toward Daniel with a look that said more than words could. They didn't buy the story. Not entirely. That small crack in the facade was enough to keep me from sinking completely into despair. Somewhere in that room, doubt was beginning to bloom. I pressed my palms together, leaning forward on the bench. This night was far from over. Inside, the music swelled, a jazz trio playing in the corner while servers in black vests carried trays of shrimp cocktails and champagne. I could see Daniel moving from table to table, shaking hands, his laughter booming above the rest. He thrived on the attention, soaking in every nod of approval, every flash of a camera. Melissa stayed close at his side, her smile sharp, almost triumphant. She touched his arm often as though reminding the room that she was part of the package. At one point, she raised her glass and said something that made the crowd laugh again. Even from where I sat, I could tell it was another line about Daniel's brilliance, his unstoppable rise. But I also noticed the small looks that passed between some of the guests. A woman in a navy dress leaned toward her companion, whispering behind her hand. A man swirled his drink, shaking his head slightly before pasting on a polite smile when Daniel glanced his way. Admiration filled the room, yes, but there was something else to suspicion. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he refused to. He launched into another story, this one about a real estate deal that had nearly collapsed until he, by his telling, swooped in to save it. He gestured broadly, describing late nights and bold decisions, his voice carrying over the clink of cutlery. The crowd laughed at his punchline, though a few eyes slid sideways, measuring the truth behind his words. I pressed the box tighter against my side, my knuckles whitening. 10 years of sacrifice rested inside that simple wood. Every boast he made twisted the knife deeper, each false claim cutting through the thin thread of patience I had left. Melissa chimed in again, her voice lilting, polished. Daniel has always been self-made, she insisted, the words clear, even without the microphone now. He's proof that hard work pays off. Hard work, the phrase stung. I thought of the mornings I left for school before sunrise, grading papers late into the night, saving every extra dime so Daniel could have more than I ever did. If that wasn't hard work, then what was the party carried on laughter and chatter, spilling out each time the door opened for another guest? I sat in the shadows across the street, a bystander to my own son's celebration, watching him paint a life that wasn't entirely his. And yet, for all the sting, I couldn't look away. The cracks were there, faint but real. A doubtful glance here, a hushed remark there. The story he had built was beginning to wobble under its own weight. I shifted forward on the bench, my resolve tightening like a knot. The time for silence was ending. Daniel thought he had built his empire on his own. Tonight he would learn otherwise. From where I sat across the street, the night carried on without me. Through the glittering glass I saw Daniel, surrounded by boxes and bags, each wrapped in shimmering paper bows glinting under the chandelier. It was gift time, the part of the evening when friends and colleagues competed to outdo each other with extravagance. The first package opened revealed a watch so sleek and polished it caught every light in the room. Daniel held it up for everyone to see, sliding it onto his wrist as though it had been waiting there all along. The crowd clapped. Melissa kissed his cheek, and Daniel laughed in that booming way of his, already imagining the compliments it would draw tomorrow. Next came a bottle of wine, its label French and impossible to pronounce. Someone joked about saving it for his first $1 million closing, and Daniel grinned as though that were a certainty, not a wish. Then came cufflinks, leather shoes, gadgets still shining from their cases. Each gift more expensive than the last, each one feeding the story he had crafted for himself, that he was a man of means, a man who had climbed every rung on his own. Melissa preened with every reveal, basking as much in the admiration as Daniel did. She clapped the loudest, her voice carrying across the room. He deserves it all. He worked harder than anyone I know. Her certainty struck like a hammer, each word pounding against the truth I carried in my arms. Then, almost as an afterthought, a server placed a smaller box on the table in front of Daniel. Unlike the others, it had no glossy wrapping, no designer ribbon. Just plain wood polish, but simple, the kind of box that didn't shout but whispered. I leaned forward on the bench, my breath caught. The box looked almost small against the backdrop of glitter and glass, but I knew its weight could crush the entire room. Daniel hesitated for the first time that night. His hand hovered above it, brow furrowing just slightly. Melissa nudged him, laughing. "Go on, open it. Let's see." He smirked, though it lacked the same confidence as before, and flipped open the clasp. The lid creaked softly, and for a moment, the party noise dulled curiosity, pulling every head toward him. Inside lay the papers I had signed month after month, year after year. Bank statements, stamped receipts. The official document showing the mortgage loan marked "paid in full." My signature in the corner, the bank's seal pressed deep in blue ink. 10 years of sacrifice sealed in a neat stack staring up at him. Daniel's face changed as though the light itself had shifted. The easy smile drained away, leaving behind a slack jaw, eyes darting as though searching for escape. The room seemed to lean in the chatter, thinning to silence. Melissa peered over his shoulder, confusion twisting quickly into something harsher. She grabbed one of the papers, scanning it, her painted nails tapping the signature. Her voice, once sweet, cracked like glass. "What is this?" Daniels. Fingers trembled as he lifted another page, his eyes darting across the figures that told a story far different from the one he had built. Each document carried the same truth. The debt he had claimed to conquer alone had been chipped away month after month by his father. By me. The silence in the room grew heavier with every second. Forks rested mid-air, glasses hovered untasted. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing down on every guest. Melissa's voice sliced through the quiet again. "You mean your father paid this?" For 10 years, her words weren't admiration. They were accusation. She stared at him with a fury that cracked the glossy shell of the evening. Daniel stammered, his face pale. It's not like that. I handled things." He tried to stuff the papers back into the box, but they slid out of his hands, spilling across the table like confetti from a party gone wrong. The guests shifted uncomfortably. A colleague from his firm picked up one of the pages, scanning it, before looking at Daniel with wide eyes. "This shows the loan was cleared by someone else." "Is that—" Your dad's name whispers spread like wildfire. I caught snatches even through the glass words like cosigner, bailout, not really his. The admiration that had filled the room moments ago curdled into doubt, then disdain. Daniel's jaw clenched. He reached for Melissa, but she pulled her arm back, eyes blazing. "All this time you let me believe. You let everyone believe." Her voice cracked not with grief, but with anger, the kind that promised consequences. The papers continued to pass from hand to hand, each guest seeing the truth stamped and sealed. The image Daniel had spent years curating collapsed in minutes. His car, his condo, his reputation, it all suddenly seemed fragile, borrowed, not built. Melissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud against the polished floor. She grabbed her purse, her heels striking sharp against the wood as she strode toward the door. Guests parted to let her through their gazes, following her exit more than Daniel's attempts at protest. Daniel remained frozen at the table, surrounded not by applause now but by silence thick enough to suffocate. His hands hovered uselessly above the scattered documents, the proof of his dependence, glaring up at him. And then came the final twist. Of the knife, one of his colleagues raised a glass not in toast but in mockery. To the man who told us he built it all, his words dripped with sarcasm, and the room erupted not in laughter but in murmurs that cut sharper than any jeer. Daniel lowered his head, shoulders sagging, as though the weight of the box had finally settled on him. For the first time all evening he looked small, almost childlike, caught in the truth he could no longer outrun. Across the street I sat motionless, my heart pounding against my ribs. The gift had done what I could not with words alone. It had spoken for me loud enough for the whole room to hear. The weight of silence inside that glittering restaurant grew unbearable. The papers still lay scattered across the table, their sharp edges catching the chandelier's light like shards of glass. Melissa was gone, her perfume lingering faintly in the air, replaced by the staleness of unease. Guests began to move slow at first, then in steady streams. A pair of Daniel's colleagues whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads as they collected their coats. One muttered, "I thought he was the real deal." Another answered with a snort. Turns out it was his dad all along. Laughter had left the room, replaced by murmurs that carried more sting than outright insults. Some guests walked out with clipped goodbyes. Others didn't bother at all, slipping quietly into the night as if embarrassed to have been there. Daniel stood frozen. Shoulders hunched, his once proud smile gone. He kept trying to gather the papers, stacking them in a shaky pile, but each time a sheet slipped away, fluttering to the floor like a stubborn reminder. He bent down, picked it up, only for another to slide loose. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. At one table, a man with a glass of scotch raised it half-heartedly. "To Daniel," he said, though his tone dripped with sarcasm. "To the empire of smoke and mirrors." A few chuckled bitterly, but it wasn't joy, it was mockery. Daniel's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. Then from the backs of the room, the restaurant manager approached. Polite but firm, his voice carried enough weight to pierce the tension. "Sir, before the evening ends, we'll need to settle the balance for the event." Daniel blinked as though struck. The reminder of money, real not imagined, landed heavy. Guests turned their heads, some exchanging knowing glances, others smirking. The shine of the evening had not only dulled, it had curdled into humiliation. And then came the sharpest blow of all. The same man who had recognized my name earlier, once my student, now one of Daniel's peers, rose from his seat. His eyes burned with something fiercer than disappointment. He spoke loudly, clearly, so no one could mistake his meaning. "You didn't even let him in, shame on you." The words cracked through the air like a gavel, final and absolute. Conversations died, mid-whisper, all attention snapping back to Daniel. He stood there pale and small, as though every accusation had etched itself into his skin. Daniel's eyes darted from face to face, desperate for someone to defend him, but the room offered no rescue. The crowd that once applauded every word now stared back with cold detachment, some with pity, most with quiet judgment. One by one, guests rose from their seats, chairs scraping against the polished floor. A woman muttered, "I can't believe I wasted my evening here," as she gathered her purse. Another man shook his head and said, to no one in particular, "Guess we all bought the story." Daniel opened his mouth, but all that came out was a cracked whisper. It's not what you think." His voice was swallowed by the shuffle of feet and the hush of voices, none willing to grant him the dignity of listening. Near the door, a younger colleague paused, glancing back at him. For a moment I thought the young man might offer comfort. Instead, he spoke plainly. "We respected you, Daniel, but respect doesn't survive lies." Then he stepped out, leaving the door to swing shut behind him. Daniel staggered, lowering himself into a chair, his head in his hands. The papers still lay scattered across the table, damning evidence he couldn't erase. The restaurant, once alive with chatter and clinking glasses, now felt cavernous, its silence louder than any music. The manager returned quietly, setting the bill on the table with practiced politeness. Daniel stared at the slip of paper as though it were written in another language. His hand hovered above it but dropped back down powerless. From the corner of the room, my former student, now his colleague, spoke once more, his voice softer, but cutting all the same. "He gave everything for you, and you left him outside." The words landed with finality. Daniel lifted his head slowly, scanning the room that was nearly empty now. The glamour was gone, the admiration gone, the love gone. All that remained was a hollow shell of celebration and the ruins of his pride. He looked around at the deserted tables, the half-empty glasses, the abandoned plates. The truth finally seemed to settle over him, heavy and undeniable. And as I sat across the street watching through the glass, I knew Daniel's world had collapsed, not by my hand alone, but by the weight of truth itself. Daniel left the restaurant with his head low, his tie loose around his neck. The night air was cold, sharper than he expected, and it seemed to pierce straight through his polished suit. He fumbled with his car keys, dropping them once before finally managing to unlock the door. The drive back to his house was silent, the engine's hum filling a space that should have been occupied by conversation, by Melissa's chatter, by laughter he could lean on. But there was none of that now. Streetlights passed in steady rhythm, each one a reminder of how far he had fallen in just a few hours. When he pulled into the driveway of the condo he had bragged about only hours before, the first thing he noticed was the absence. The window that usually glowed warmly was dark. The curtains were half drawn, and when he stepped inside, the emptiness struck him harder than any words from the party. Melissa's belongings were gone. Her shoes, always scattered by the front door, had vanished. The jewelry box on the dresser was missing. Even the faint trace of her perfume that usually clung to the air had been replaced by a stillness that pressed against him like a wall. Daniel dropped his keys on the counter, the clatter echoing in the hollow space. He walked through each room slowly, as though hoping she might suddenly appear ready with some sharp remark that meant she was still there. But each step only confirmed what he already knew: she had left and she wasn't coming back. In the bathroom mirror, he caught sight of himself. His hair was mussed, his face pale, his eyes rimmed red. He leaned closer, gripping the sink with both hands. And there it was, the memory he couldn't shake. My face. The look I must have worn when he stopped me at the door earlier that night. That look of quiet hurt, a betrayal of a father who had given everything only to be told he was not welcome. Daniel shut his eyes, but the image burned brighter. For the first time, he wondered if this was what it meant to be stripped bare, not in front of strangers, but in front of the truth. Across town, my night was quieter, but no less heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Beside me sat my weekly pill box, its lids already flipped open for the morning. I lined up the tablets carefully, the small ritual steadying my hands. On the wall hung a photograph of us, Margaret, Daniel, and me. It had been taken at a county fair long ago, Daniel on my shoulder sticky with cotton candy, Margaret laughing beside us. I stared at it longer than I meant, to the warmth of that day, a contrast to the cold silence of the house now. And somewhere out there, I knew Daniel was facing a silence of his own. Daniel wandered through the empty condo, each step echoing louder than the last. He opened closets only to find hollow spaces where Melissa's dresses once hung. The bathroom counter, once cluttered with her makeup, now looked sterile, almost like a hotel room after checkout. The life he had shown off to the world had evaporated in a single evening. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the sheets still creased from where she had slept the night before. He pressed his palms to his face and finally let the tears fall hot and relentless. The sobs came in waves, breaking through years of pride, years of pretending he didn't need anyone. In the silence between them, memories returned uninvited. He saw himself as a boy again, standing in the backyard while I patched up a bike tire, patient and careful. He remembered the way I sat up with him through nights of study, reminding him that he was capable, that he could push further. He remembered birthdays when the cake leaned sideways, but the laughter was straight and full. And he remembered the look in my eyes tonight, pain, but not anger. Disappointment, but not hatred. A look that said he was still my son even when he didn't deserve it. Across town, I poured myself a cup of decaf coffee, the steam curling into the quiet of my kitchen. I held the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. I wasn't celebrating his humiliation, not for a moment. I hadn't wanted revenge for the sake of cruelty. What I wanted, what I prayed for, was that he would finally see what mattered. I glanced again at the photo on the wall. Margaret's smile seemed almost alive in the dim light, as though she too was waiting to see if her son would find his way back. Daniel lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, the silence felt unbearable, not just because Melissa was gone, not just because his friends had turned their backs, but because the hollowness inside him could no longer be drowned out by applause and possessions. He whispered into the dark, his voice breaking. "Dad." No one answered. The only response was the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of a clock on the nightstand. Yet even in the emptiness, something stirred, a realization, fragile but present. For the first time in years, Daniel saw that the life he had built on pride and pretense was nothing more than sand. And for the first time, he longed for something solid: forgiveness, connection, a way home. The night had grown heavier by the time the knock came. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, the pill box closed, now my coffee gone cold. The clock ticked steadily in the quiet, a rhythm that usually soothed me, but tonight only reminded me of how long the hours stretched. The knock was soft at first, almost hesitant. I thought it might be the wind rattling the screen door, but then it came again, 3 uneven taps that carried something fragile in them. When I opened the door, I saw Daniel. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his eyes swollen and red. He looked nothing like the man who had strutted into that restaurant hours ago. He didn't stand tall or try to force a smile. Instead, the moment our eyes met, his knees buckled and he sank onto the porch step like a child who had lost his way. I'm sorry, Dad. He said, his voice broken. I was wrong. The words tumbled out raw and stripped of pride. For a moment I simply stood there, my hand still on the doorknob. A dozen feelings surged at once: anger, sorrow, disbelief, but I stayed silent. Sometimes silence carries more weight than any reprimand. Daniel pressed his palms together as though in prayer, tears running down his face. I let it get out of control. I cared more about what people thought than about the truth. I didn't want to be seen as the kid who only made it because of his dad. Melissa, she pushed me too. She said no one would respect me unless I looked like I'd built it all on my own, and I believed her. I thought I had to keep proving myself, even if it meant... His voice cracked and he covered his face. Even if it meant pushing you aside. I looked down at him, my chest tight. I thought of the years of sacrifice, the quiet mornings I'd spent writing checks, the nights I'd gone without new shoes or a decent car just to make sure his payments were met. I thought of the pride I once felt in him and the ache that had replaced it. And yet, seeing him there broken, humbled, undone, I could not deny that he was still my son. I stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in," I said softly. Daniel stepped inside slowly, as though afraid the ground might give way beneath him. The familiar creak of the floorboards seemed louder with each step. He paused in the kitchen, his eyes falling on the old photograph on the wall, the one of him on my shoulders, Margaret laughing beside us. His lips quivered, but he said nothing. We sat at the table, the same one where he'd once done homework while I graded papers late into the night. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I kept telling myself I had to be bigger than you, that if I admitted how much you helped me, I'd never be respected. Melissa, she wanted the house, the parties, the image. She said weakness wasn't an option, and I believed her. His hands shook as he reached for a napkin, twisting it until it tore. But the truth is, Dad, I was scared. Scared of being ordinary. Scared that without you, I was nothing. I studied his face, the boy I once carried, the man he had tried to become. His pride had been a shield, but shields can become cages. Tonight, his cage had shattered. "You hurt me, Daniel," I said quietly. "Not just with what you did tonight, but with every time you pretended I didn't matter. With every moment you made me feel like a burden instead of a father." Tears welled again in his eyes. He nodded, unable to meet my gaze. "I know, and I can't take it back. But I need you to know I don't want to lose you. Not after everything." The weight of his words pressed heavy on both of us. Forgiveness was not simple, nor could it erase the scars, but as I sat there, I realized this was the first time in years that Daniel had spoken to me without armor, without arrogance, just as a son. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. "This isn't about money, Daniel. It never was. All I wanted was your respect, your honesty, your time." For the first time, he looked at me fully, eyes red and raw. "Then let me start now," he whispered. We sat in silence again, but it was different now, less of a void, more of a fragile beginning. The night outside stretched long, but in that small kitchen, something shifted. Not a full repair, not yet, but the first stitch in a torn fabric. The kitchen felt smaller than ever, though nothing about its size had changed. It was the weight of the moment that shrank the space, pulling both of us inward. Daniel sat hunched forward, elbows on the table, his hands pressed together as if still praying. His shoulders shook from the effort of holding himself steady. I let the silence stretch because sometimes silence teaches more than words. Finally, I cleared my throat, slow and deliberate. "I didn't do this to humiliate you, Daniel." His head jerked up, eyes wide and wet. He searched my face as if hoping I would soften, as if hoping the shame would be erased. But I kept my voice steady. "I did it to remind you family cannot be bought or betrayed. You can climb the tallest ladder, you can drive the newest car, you can throw the grandest party, but none of it matters if you step on the people who carried you there. None of it matters if you spit on the love that raised you." Daniel swallowed hard. His lips trembled and he whispered, "I know, Dad. I see it now. I see it clearer than I ever have." But I wasn't finished. For 10 years I carried your debt. Not because I wanted to brag about it, not because I thought I'd ever get something back. I did it because you were my son. I believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. And the one thing I asked, the only thing I ever wanted was your respect. Not applause, not fame, not a pat on the back, just respect. Daniel bowed his head again, tears dripping onto the table. His voice cracked as he said, I disrespected you in the worst way. I let pride blind me. I thought keeping you in the shadows would make me shine brighter. But it only left me hollow. I leaned closer, resting both hands on the table. My voice dropped low. Never again, Daniel. Never look down on your father's love. If you forget everything else in life, don't forget this money will vanish. Friends will scatter. But the bond of blood and the duty of love, they are the only riches worth keeping. His sobs came stronger now, shaking his whole frame. He reached across the table, his hand trembling as it grasped mine. For a moment, I let it sit there. His grip was desperate, clinging not to me alone, but to the chance of redemption. I studied his hand over mine, bigger now than it had been when I taught him to hold the baseball bat, but still the same hand. A son's hand, scarred by mistakes, searching for an anchor. My chest tightened, but I didn't pull away. Daniel's grip tightened, his knuckles white, as if letting go would mean losing his last chance. He lowered his head, the words spilling out between sobs. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Dad. I don't deserve to sit here. But if you can give me even one more chance, I swear I'll never waste it. I held his hand firmly, steadying his trembling. My voice softened, though it carried the weight of years. This was never about deserving, Daniel. Love isn't earned like a paycheck. It's given. But respect, that's what you must choose every single day. He nodded, his tears blotting the napkin he had shredded earlier. I understand. I really do. I don't know how to start again. You start, I said slowly, by being honest. By showing up. By remembering that no title, no house, no party is worth more than the people who will sit beside you when all of that is gone. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, part broken, part relieved. Then I've got a lot of work to do. The clock ticked on the wall, its hands moving quietly forward. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't hostile. It wasn't heavy with unspoken bitterness. It was tentative, fragile, but alive. I leaned back, letting go of his hand, though the warmth lingered. Never again, Daniel. Never look down on your father's love. If you can remember that, maybe you'll find your way back. His face crumpled, and then, without hesitation, he stood and came around the table. He bent down, wrapping his arms around me, holding on like he was afraid I might disappear. His sobs shook both of us, but I didn't push him away. I rested a hand on his back, steady, firm. Not in full forgiveness, not in complete reconciliation, but in recognition. Recognition that he was still my son and that even broken things can be mended, if given the chance. The night outside was still dark, the world still uncertain. I didn't know if Daniel would truly change, if the lessons of this night would stay with him when the shame faded and life demanded new choices. But I knew one thing: the seed was planted. The truth had struck deep, and whether it bore fruit or withered, that would be his choice, not mine. I had done what I set out to do. Not to destroy him, not to humiliate him, but to remind him of the one truth that outlasts everything. Family is not a ladder to climb, but a bond to honor. As Daniel wept in my arms, I whispered into the silence, not sure if he even heard. This is your chance, son. Don't waste it. The kitchen light flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. The house was the same, as it had always been, small, old, worn, but in that moment it held something new, the fragile possibility of redemption. And I sat there, knowing my work as a father was not finished, but perhaps for the first time in a long time it had begun again. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.